When my husband was tucking our son in, he said, "Mommy's just the backup parent until she gets a real job, buddy." I stood in the hallway outside my son's bedroom door at 8:30 on a Wednesday night, frozen with my hand on the doorknob. My husband Trevor was sitting on the edge of 6-year-old Aiden's bed, tucking the blanket around him. I'd just gotten home from my nursing shift at the hospital and wanted to say goodnight before Aiden fell asleep. But Trevor's voice carried through the partially open door, and I heard every word clearly. "Mommy's just the backup parent until she gets a real job, buddy. That's why she's never here for important stuff. Real moms stay home with their kids." Aiden's small voice asked if I didn't love him as much as Daddy did. Trevor laughed softly and said that wasn't it exactly, but that some jobs were more important than others, and some parents were more important than others. He said I'd chosen patients at the hospital over my own family, and that's why Daddy had to do everything. Aiden asked if that's why I missed his school play last week. Trevor said exactly right. That's why Daddy was the one who showed up and took pictures and cheered. I pushed the door open and both of them looked at me. Trevor's face shifted instantly to a warm smile and he stood up from the bed. Trevor walked toward me and said I was home early, kissing my cheek as he passed into the hallway. His tone was cheerful and normal, nothing like the poison he'd just been feeding our son. I sat on Aiden's bed and asked if he'd brushed his teeth. He nodded and pulled the blanket up to his chin. I asked about his day at school and he gave short answers, not making eye contact. When I leaned down to kiss his forehead, he turned his face away slightly. Not a full rejection, just enough to notice. I asked if everything was okay and he said Daddy already tucked him in and he was tired. I told him I loved him and he mumbled something back that might have been "love you too," or might have been nothing. I left his room and found Trevor in our bedroom scrolling through his phone. I asked what he'd been telling Aiden about me. Trevor looked confused and asked what I meant. I said I'd heard him call me the backup parent and tell Aiden I didn't have a real job. Trevor laughed and said I must have misheard. He said he'd been talking about backup plans for Aiden's birthday party. I told him I knew what I'd heard. He set his phone down and his expression changed from friendly to cold. He said if I was going to eavesdrop on private conversations between him and his son, maybe we needed to talk about boundaries. His son, not our son. I caught that immediately. Trevor stood up and said he'd been trying to help Aiden understand why I was never around for important family moments. He said it wasn't his fault that I'd prioritized my career over being a present mother. I reminded him that I was a registered nurse working 3 12-hour shifts per week at the regional hospital, which provided half our household income and our entire health insurance. Trevor said exactly, I was working when I should be home raising our child. He'd been picking up my slack for years, being the parent who actually showed up. I asked what he meant by that, and he started listing things. He took Aiden to school every morning. He picked him up every afternoon. He went to parent-teacher conferences alone because I was always working. He coached Aiden's soccer team. He volunteered at the school. He was the one Aiden called when he was scared or sick or needed something. I was just the person who came home exhausted and distant 3 nights a week. I felt anger building in my chest, but I tried to stay calm. I pointed out that my nursing shifts were Wednesday through Friday, and that I was home with Aiden every Saturday through Monday. Trevor said being home wasn't the same as being present. He said I was always recovering from work or preparing for the next shift. He said Aiden had started asking why Mommy didn't love him as much as other moms loved their kids. I felt my throat tighten. Aiden had never said anything like that to me directly. Trevor saw my reaction, and his expression softened into something that looked almost sympathetic. He said he wasn't trying to hurt me, just being honest about what Aiden had been feeling. He said maybe I should consider going part-time or finding a different job with better hours, something that would let me be more available for our family. I said we needed my income and my benefits. Trevor said we'd figure it out. His contracting business was doing well, and we could manage on less if it meant having a real mother for Aiden instead of an absent one. The way he said real mother made me understand this wasn't a new conversation in his mind. This was something he'd been thinking about and apparently discussing with our son for a while. I asked how long he'd been telling Aiden I wasn't a real parent. Trevor said he'd never used those exact words. He'd just been honest with Aiden about why I missed school events and bedtimes and soccer games. He was helping Aiden understand that not all parents prioritize their children the same way. I told him that was parental alienation and it was abusive. Trevor's face went hard. He said I was being dramatic and turning a conversation about parenting priorities into some kind of attack. He said if I felt alienated from Aiden, maybe I should look at my own choices instead of blaming him for telling the truth. I left the bedroom and went to the kitchen. My hands were shaking as I poured a glass of water. I'd been a nurse for 8 years, married to Trevor for 7. Aiden was 6 and in first grade. My nursing schedule had always been 3 12-hour shifts Wednesday through Friday with occasional weekend coverage when the unit was short-staffed. Trevor knew this when we'd gotten married. He'd known it when we'd decided to have Aiden. He'd said he supported my career and that we'd make it work as a team. For the first few years, it had worked. We'd coordinated schedules and shared responsibilities. But sometime in the past year, something had shifted. Trevor had started making comments about how hard it was being the primary parent, how much he sacrificed, how Aiden was suffering because I wasn't available. I'd thought he was just venting stress from his business or from managing Aiden's increasingly busy schedule. I hadn't realized he was actively teaching our son to see me as less important, as not a real parent. I sat at the kitchen table and tried to think clearly. Tomorrow was Thursday, one of my work days. I'd be at the hospital from 7 in the morning until 8 at night. Trevor would take Aiden to school and pick him up and handle dinner and bedtime. This was our normal routine every Thursday, and it had never been a problem before. But now, I was hearing it differently. Now I was wondering what Trevor said to Aiden during those 12 hours I was gone. What messages he was reinforcing about my absence. What damage he was doing to my relationship with my son. Friday morning, I woke up at 5:30 and got ready for work in the dark bedroom while Trevor slept. I checked on Aiden, who was still asleep in his bed, his stuffed dinosaur tucked under his arm. I left the house at 6:20 and drove 40 minutes to the hospital through dawn traffic. My unit was medical surgical, 32 beds of post-operative patients and complex medical cases. I worked the day shift Thursday through Saturday every week unless someone called in sick, then I'd pick up extra shifts. The work was demanding, but I was good at it. I'd been charge nurse for the past 2 years, and my manager frequently praised my clinical skills and leadership. My patients trusted me. My colleagues respected me. But standing in the hospital parking lot that morning, watching the sun come up over the building, I felt like none of that mattered compared to what Trevor was doing at home. I thought about calling in sick, but I'd never done that before, and it wouldn't solve anything. I went inside and started my shift. Throughout the day, I kept checking my phone during breaks, hoping Aiden's school would call about something so I'd have an excuse to be involved. Nothing came. At lunch, I called Trevor and asked how the morning had gone. He said fine. Aiden was at school and everything was normal. I asked if Aiden had mentioned anything about last night. Trevor asked what specifically, and I said our conversation about me being the backup parent. Trevor sighed and said I really needed to let that go. He said he'd been trying to help Aiden process his feelings and I was turning it into drama. I hung up feeling worse than before I'd called. Saturday morning, I was off work and home with Aiden while Trevor left early to meet a client about a bathroom remodel. This was my time with my son, Saturday and Sunday, and Monday when Trevor was working. I made pancakes for breakfast and Aiden sat at the table looking at his tablet. I asked what he wanted to do today and he said Daddy already planned a movie for tonight when he got home. I said we could do something fun together this morning, just us. Aiden asked if we could go to the arcade and I said absolutely. We drove to the arcade downtown and I bought tokens and we played games for 2 hours. Aiden seemed happy during the games, laughing when he won tickets and showing me his scores. But in between games, he'd get quiet and withdrawn. I asked what was wrong and he said nothing. We got lunch at the food court and while we were eating, Aiden asked when I was going back to work. I said not until Wednesday. He said that was 4 days and seemed surprised. I asked if he thought I worked more than that and he said Daddy said I was always working. I explained my schedule carefully, showing him on my phone calendar how I worked 3 days and was off 4 days every week. He looked at the calendar and then at me and said Daddy said I picked work over him. I felt my chest tighten. I told Aiden that wasn't true, that I worked to help take care of our family and that I loved him more than anything. He nodded but didn't look convinced. When we got home that afternoon, Trevor was already there. He asked how the arcade was and Aiden ran to him and hugged him and told him all about the games we'd played. Trevor listened and smiled and ruffled Aiden's hair. Then he looked at me over Aiden's head and his expression was smug, satisfied. He knew exactly what he was doing. I started paying closer attention to how Trevor talked about me in front of Aiden. Sunday morning, we were all in the kitchen and Aiden asked about his soccer game on Wednesday afternoon. Trevor said of course he'd be there. He never missed games. He glanced at me and said Mommy might make it if the hospital could spare her. I said I'd requested to leave by 3 on Wednesday specifically for the game and had already gotten approval from my manager. Trevor said that's nice, but he wouldn't count on it. Hospitals had a way of keeping nurses late for emergencies. He told Aiden that's why Daddy was the one to rely on for important events. Aiden looked between us and I could see him processing this information, filing it away into his understanding of who his parents were. Monday morning, Trevor left for work and I had the day alone with Aiden. We went to the park and did homework together and baked cookies. I tried to be as present and engaged as possible, but I kept noticing little things Aiden said that showed Trevor's influence. He asked if real moms worked at hospitals or stayed home. He said his friend Casey's mom was always at school volunteering. He asked if I was sad that I missed so much of his life because of my job. Each question was like a knife. These weren't a 6-year-old's natural thoughts. These were concepts Trevor had planted and was nurturing. I called my friend Lauren that evening after Aiden went to bed. Lauren and I had been friends since nursing school and she had 3 kids of her own. I explained what was happening and she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said it sounded like parental alienation and I needed to document everything. She said keep a journal with dates and exact quotes, record conversations if possible, talk to Aiden's teacher about any concerning comments, consider getting a custody evaluation if things got worse. I said we weren't divorced. We were married and living together. Lauren said that didn't matter. This was abuse and it could impact custody later if the marriage ended. The marriage ending felt impossible to consider, but Lauren's tone was serious. She'd worked in pediatrics before moving to adult care and had seen cases like this. She said it usually got worse, not better. I started documenting everything in a small notebook I kept in my car. Tuesday morning, Trevor made a comment about how Aiden would be better off if I found a different career. I wrote it down with the date and time. That afternoon, when I picked Aiden up from school, he said his teacher asked where Daddy was. I asked what he meant, and he said Mrs. Kimball had asked if Daddy was sick because Mommy came to pick him up instead. I went back into the school and found Mrs. Kimball at her desk. I introduced myself as Aiden's mother, and she looked surprised. She said she'd seen me at conferences before, but that Aiden's father did most of the pickups and drop-offs. I explained my work schedule and that I was home Monday through Wednesday every week. Mrs. Kimball nodded slowly and said Aiden talked about his dad a lot but rarely mentioned me. She said she'd assumed I worked full-time or traveled for work based on how Aiden described his family life. I asked what exactly Aiden said, and she pulled out some papers from his folder. There were drawings from family unit lessons. In one picture labeled My Family, Aiden had drawn himself and Trevor playing soccer with the caption Me and Dad. I was a small figure in the background labeled Mom at Hospital. Another drawing for a Mother's Day project showed me with a frowning face and text that said, My mom works all the time. Mrs. Kimball said she'd been meaning to mention these but hadn't wanted to pry into family matters. I told her I worked 3 days a week and was home 4 days a week. I was very much present in Aiden's life. Mrs. Kimball said that wasn't the impression Aiden gave. She said he described his father as his primary caregiver and me as someone who came home tired and distant. That evening, I confronted Trevor with the drawings and what Mrs. Kimball had said. Trevor looked at the pictures and shrugged. He said he couldn't control what Aiden drew or how he felt. If Aiden perceived me as absent, that was my reality to deal with, not his to manage. I said he was actively shaping Aiden's perception by making negative comments about me and my job. Trevor said he was being honest with Aiden about adult realities. He said someday Aiden would understand that careers required sacrifice, and that his mother had chosen to sacrifice family time for professional achievement. The way he framed it made me sound selfish and ambitious, when all I'd done was maintain the same nursing job I'd had before Aiden was born. Trevor said maybe I should talk to a therapist about my defensiveness. He said I was projecting my guilt about being an absent mother onto him instead of taking responsibility for my choices. I told him he was gaslighting me. He said I was using therapy terms I didn't understand to avoid accepting valid criticism. He said if I wanted to improve my relationship with Aiden, I should focus on being more present instead of attacking him for picking up my slack. I went to bed that night feeling like I was going insane. Trevor was rewriting history and manipulating our son and making me question my own reality. I'd been a good mother. I'd been present and involved and loving. But now I was seeing Aiden pull away from me and blame me for things that weren't my fault, and view Trevor as the only parent who mattered. I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed next to Trevor, who was snoring softly, and I thought about what Lauren had said about documentation and custody evaluations. I thought about what might happen if I didn't stop this now. That Wednesday morning, I got up for work at 5:30 as usual. Trevor woke up too and followed me to the bathroom. He said we needed to talk about our relationship. I said we could talk tonight after work. He said no, this couldn't wait. He'd been thinking about our marriage and he didn't think it was working anymore. I stopped brushing my teeth and turned to face him. He said he'd been doing the work of 2 parents for too long and he was exhausted. He said Aiden deserved better than a part-time mother, and he deserved better than a wife who put her career first. I said I didn't put my career first, I worked 3 days a week to support our family. Trevor said if I really cared about our family, I'd quit or go part-time. I said we needed my income and insurance. He said that was an excuse. Plenty of families survived on one income if the mother actually wanted to be home with her kids. The way he said the mother made it clear this was about gender roles, not about actual parenting or finances. I told him I wasn't quitting my job. He said then maybe we needed to separate. I stared at him in the bathroom mirror. He looked serious. I asked if he was threatening divorce because I wouldn't quit nursing. He said he was trying to save our family before it was too late. He said Aiden needed a full-time parent and Trevor couldn't keep doing everything alone. I said I'd talk to my manager about changing shifts or reducing hours. Trevor said that wasn't enough. He wanted me home. Fully home, not working at all. I said that was unrealistic and unfair. He said then we had different priorities and maybe we weren't compatible anymore. I drove to work that morning in shock. Had Trevor just threatened divorce as a way to force me to quit my job? I called Lauren from the hospital parking lot and told her what happened. She said I needed to call a family law attorney immediately. This wasn't just parental alienation anymore. This was coercive control. Trevor was using the threat of divorce and the custody of Aiden to manipulate me into quitting my job and becoming financially dependent on him. Lauren gave me the name of an attorney she knew who handled difficult custody cases. I called and left a message explaining I needed a consultation about a potential separation. The receptionist called back during my lunch break and scheduled me for Thursday afternoon. I worked my full shift Wednesday, but my mind was spinning. I left at 3 to make Aiden's soccer game. When I arrived at the field, Trevor was already there with Aiden on the sideline warming up. I walked over and Aiden ran to Trevor and told him he was nervous about the game. Trevor hugged him and said Daddy was right here and would cheer for every play. Aiden saw me standing there and waved but didn't come over. I sat on the bleachers away from Trevor. During the game, Aiden scored a goal and looked immediately to where Trevor was standing. Trevor cheered and jumped and made a huge celebration. Aiden ran to him after the play and Trevor high-fived him and said he was so proud. Aiden didn't look at me once. After the game, I tried to congratulate Aiden and he said thanks, but Daddy already said he was proud. Trevor put his hand on Aiden's shoulder and said, "Let's go celebrate with ice cream, just us boys." I said I could come too. Trevor said he thought Mommy had to get home and rest from her long shift. He said Aiden and Daddy needed some time together anyway. They walked to Trevor's truck and drove away while I stood in the parking lot alone. Thursday afternoon, I went to see the attorney, Gregory Vaughn, in his office downtown. I explained everything that had been happening. The comments Trevor made about me being a backup parent, the drawings from school, the conversation with Mrs. Kimball, Trevor's threat of divorce if I didn't quit my job, the way Aiden was pulling away from me. Gregory listened and took notes. When I finished, he said this was a clear case of parental alienation combined with financial coercion. He asked if I had any documentation. I showed him my notebook with dates and quotes from the past 2 weeks. He said that was good, but I needed more. He needed recordings if possible, emails or text messages showing Trevor's behavior, statements from witnesses like the teacher or friends. He said in custody cases, especially when one parent was claiming the other was absent or neglectful, documentation was critical. He asked about my work schedule and I explained the 3 12-hour shifts. He said that was completely reasonable and normal for a nurse. Courts understood that working parents had schedules. What courts didn't tolerate was one parent actively undermining the other. He said if Trevor was teaching Aiden that I was less important or less valuable, that was alienation. If Trevor was threatening divorce to force me to quit working, that was coercive control. Both could impact custody decisions. Gregory said I should strongly consider moving toward separation sooner rather than later. Every day Aiden spent absorbing Trevor's messages was another day of damage to our relationship. I said I didn't want a divorce. I wanted Trevor to stop. Gregory said from his experience, people like Trevor didn't stop. They escalated. He said I should prepare for the worst-case scenario, which was a contested custody battle. I left Gregory's office feeling overwhelmed. He'd given me a retainer agreement for $5,000 if I decided to proceed with separation paperwork. I didn't have $5,000 readily available. My savings account had maybe $2,000. Everything else was in joint accounts with Trevor. I couldn't take money out for an attorney without Trevor noticing and asking questions. I sat in my car and called my mother in Florida. I explained the situation in halting sentences and she was horrified. She asked why I hadn't told her this was happening sooner. I said I hadn't realized how bad it was until the past few weeks. My mother said she'd wire me $5,000 tomorrow to cover the attorney retainer. She said if I needed more for court costs or custody evaluations, she'd figure it out. My father had left her a modest life insurance policy when he died 3 years ago, and she'd been saving it for emergencies. This qualified. I thanked her and felt tears building. She said Trevor had always been controlling, but she'd thought he'd mellowed after Aiden was born. She said she'd noticed during their last visit at Christmas that Trevor dominated conversations and dismissed me when I spoke, but she'd thought it was just marital tension. Now she understood it was worse than that. She told me to protect myself and Aiden whatever it took. Friday morning, I went to work for my regular shift and tried to function normally. During lunch, I checked my bank account and saw my mother's wire transfer had come through. $5,000 sitting in my personal account that Trevor didn't have access to. That money felt like safety, like options, like a way out if I needed one. That weekend was tense. Trevor acted like everything was normal on the surface, but there was an edge to his comments. He told Aiden that Mommy was only home on weekends, so they should appreciate her while they could. He suggested I was probably tired from working all week and needed rest instead of joining them for errands. He made a comment during dinner about how nice it would be if I could cook homemade meals more often instead of buying rotisserie chicken from the store. Each comment was designed to reinforce the narrative that I was inadequate, that I was failing as a mother and wife, that Trevor was carrying the family alone. I started recording conversations on my phone. Not obviously, just keeping my phone on the counter during meals or in my pocket with the voice recorder app running. I captured Trevor telling Aiden that some moms cared more about their careers than their kids, and that was sad but true. I captured him saying I'd chosen nursing school over staying home when Aiden was a baby, and that's why I'd missed so much of Aiden's early years. That was a complete lie. I'd taken 8 weeks maternity leave and then returned to work part-time for 6 months before going back to my 3-day schedule. Trevor had been supportive at the time, but now he was rewriting history to make me the villain. I sent the recordings to Lauren and asked her to keep copies in case something happened to my phone. She texted back immediately saying these were damning and I needed to show them to my attorney. Monday morning after Trevor left for work, I sat down with Aiden and asked him some careful questions about how he felt about our family. I didn't want to lead him or put words in his mouth. I just wanted to understand his perceptions. I asked if he was happy and he said yes. I asked if he felt loved by both Mommy and Daddy and he said yes, but Daddy more. I asked why and he said Daddy was always there and Mommy wasn't. I asked if he remembered the times we spent together on weekends and he said yes, but that was only 2 days. I asked if he knew how many days Mommy worked and he said all the time. I gently corrected him and explained my schedule again with specific examples. I showed him the calendar on the wall with my work days marked in blue. 3 days blue, 4 days unmarked. I asked if he understood and he looked at the calendar and nodded slowly. Then he asked why Daddy said I worked all the time if I only worked 3 days. That was the moment I knew I was doing the right thing, pursuing legal protection. My 6-year-old son was confused because his father had been systematically lying to him about me for months. I called Gregory's office that afternoon and said I wanted to move forward. I paid the retainer fee and we scheduled a meeting for Wednesday to begin separation paperwork. Gregory said he'd file for legal separation with a request for temporary custody evaluation. He wanted a neutral third party to assess both parents and make recommendations about what arrangement was in Aiden's best interest. He said these evaluations took weeks and cost several thousand additional dollars, but they were worth it in cases like mine where one parent was alienating the other. The evaluator would interview both parents, observe us with Aiden, talk to Aiden separately, and interview collateral contacts like teachers and family members. The evaluator's report would carry significant weight with the judge. I asked what would happen when Trevor found out I'd filed for separation. Gregory said he'd be served with papers at home or work depending on what I preferred. Once he was served, he'd have the opportunity to respond and get his own attorney. We'd go through a discovery process where both sides exchanged information and documentation. Then there would be hearings and eventually a trial if we couldn't settle. He said the whole process could take 6 months to a year. I said I didn't want Aiden damaged for 6 months while Trevor continued alienating him. Gregory said that's why we'd request an emergency custody hearing right away. We'd present evidence of the alienation and ask the judge for temporary orders protecting my parenting time while the full case proceeded. He said judges took parental alienation seriously, especially when there was clear evidence of one parent poisoning the child against the other. I signed the paperwork that Wednesday authorizing Gregory to file on my behalf. The papers were served to Trevor on Friday morning while I was at work. He called me 17 times before I could get to my phone during my lunch break. When I finally answered, he was screaming. He said I'd destroyed our family. He said I was ripping Aiden's life apart because I couldn't handle criticism about my parenting. He said he'd fight me for custody and prove I was an unfit mother who prioritized career over child. I hung up on him and called Gregory. He said this was expected and I should not engage with Trevor directly. All communication should go through attorneys from this point forward. I said I needed to get my clothes and belongings from the house. Gregory said he'd arrange for police presence during a supervised exchange. Saturday morning, 2 police officers met me at the house while Trevor and Aiden were out running errands. I packed 2 suitcases with clothes and important documents. My nursing license, Aiden's birth certificate, our marriage certificate, bank statements, medical records. I took photos of Aiden's drawings from school that showed Trevor's influence. I found a folder in Trevor's desk with printed articles about parental alienation and how to prove the other parent was absent. He'd been researching how to build a case against me. I took photos of everything in that folder. One of the officers asked if I was okay and I said I was leaving my husband. He nodded and said they saw this kind of thing a lot. He said document everything and keep records. Domestic situations that involved kids could get ugly fast. I loaded my suitcases in my car and drove to a hotel near the hospital. I'd be staying there temporarily until I could find an apartment. The temporary custody hearing was scheduled for the following Wednesday. Gregory filed an emergency motion arguing that Aiden was being emotionally harmed by Trevor's alienating behaviors and that I needed protected parenting time to rebuild my relationship with my son. The motion included my documentation, the recordings, the drawings from school, and a statement from Mrs. Kimball about the concerning things Aiden had said. Trevor's attorney filed a response claiming I was abandoning the family and that my work schedule proved I was an absent parent. They painted me as someone who put career above child and argued that Aiden was better off in his father's primary custody. The arguments were exactly what Trevor had been saying for months, now formalized in legal documents. Wednesday morning, I put on my best professional clothes and drove to the courthouse. Gregory met me outside and we went through security together. Trevor was already there with his attorney, a woman named Patricia Horn who had a reputation for aggressive representation. Trevor wouldn't look at me. We sat in the courtroom waiting for our case to be called and I felt sick. The judge was a woman in her 50s named Judge Frances Wolfe. She looked stern as she reviewed the case file. When our case was called, Gregory stood and presented our argument. He explained that I was a registered nurse working a standard 3-day schedule. He showed my work calendar proving I was home 4 days per week, including every Monday when Aiden was off school. He played portions of the recordings where Trevor made disparaging comments about me. He showed the drawings from school where Aiden described me as always working and Trevor as his primary parent. He read Mrs. Kimball's statement about how Aiden rarely mentioned me and described his father as his main caregiver. Gregory argued this pattern was classic parental alienation, where one parent systematically undermined the other's role and importance. Judge Wolfe asked Patricia to respond. Patricia argued that Trevor had been the primary caretaker for years due to my demanding work schedule. She said 3 12-hour shifts might seem reasonable on paper, but in practice meant I was gone from early morning to late evening on those days. She said Trevor had naturally become the parent Aiden relied on because I wasn't available. She claimed the recordings were taken out of context and that Trevor had simply been honest with Aiden about why I missed events. She said Aiden's drawings reflected his genuine feelings, not parental manipulation. Judge Wolfe asked Trevor directly if he'd been making negative comments about me to Aiden. Trevor said he'd been trying to help Aiden understand why his mother wasn't around as much as other mothers. He said he'd never told Aiden to love me less, just helped him process disappointment when I missed school events or bedtimes. Judge Wolfe asked about the comment calling me a backup parent. Trevor said that was an exaggeration and I'd misheard. The judge looked skeptical. She said she'd heard the recording and the words were quite clear. Trevor said he'd been frustrated and vented inappropriately, but that didn't make him an alienating parent. He said I was the one abandoning the family by filing for separation instead of working on our marriage. Judge Wolfe reviewed all the evidence for 20 minutes while the courtroom stayed silent. Then she announced her decision. She said there was enough concerning evidence to warrant a full custody evaluation. She appointed Dr. Lisa Brennan as the evaluator and ordered both parents to cooperate fully with the evaluation process. In the meantime, she established a temporary custody schedule. Aiden would spend Sunday through Wednesday with me and Wednesday night through Saturday with Trevor. This was a dramatic shift from Trevor having Aiden most of the time. Judge Wolf said the split schedule would give the evaluator a chance to observe both parents having substantial time with Aiden. She ordered both parents to refrain from making any negative comments about the other in front of Aiden. She said violation of this order would be taken seriously and could impact final custody decisions. The temporary order would last through the evaluation process, which she estimated at 8 to 10 weeks. Patricia objected and argued that disrupting Aiden's routine would be harmful. Judge Wolf said Aiden's routine had been built on one parent monopolizing time and undermining the other parent. The schedule she'd ordered was more balanced and would allow Aiden to have a real relationship with both parents. Court was adjourned. I walked out feeling both relief and terror. I'd gotten more parenting time, but I hadn't seen Aiden in 5 days and didn't know how he'd react to the new schedule. Trevor and Patricia left quickly without speaking to me. Gregory said the judge's decision was good. The skepticism she'd shown toward Trevor's explanations suggested she saw through the manipulation. Now I needed to focus on the evaluation and showing Dr. Brennan that I was a present, capable parent. I had to rebuild my relationship with Aiden while being assessed by a professional who would decide our future. The first custody exchange happened that Sunday at 4 in the afternoon at a neutral location, a parking lot outside the public library. Gregory had arranged it through the attorneys to avoid confrontation at the house. I arrived early and sat in my car watching the entrance. Trevor pulled up exactly at 4 with Aiden in the back seat. They got out and Trevor held Aiden's hand walking toward my car. Aiden looked confused and a little scared. I got out and knelt down to his level. I said I was so happy to see him and I'd missed him. Aiden looked at Trevor and then back at me. Trevor said the judge ordered that Aiden would be staying with Mommy for a few days. Aiden asked why, and Trevor said because Mommy asked the court to change things. Trevor handed me Aiden's backpack and told Aiden to be good for Mommy. Aiden hugged Trevor and started crying. Trevor hugged him back and said it would be okay. Daddy would see him Wednesday. Aiden got in my car and buckled himself while crying. Trevor walked back to his truck without looking at me. I got in the driver's seat and tried to comfort Aiden. He asked why he had to leave Daddy, and I said the judge thought it would be good for him to spend more time with me. He said he didn't want to. He wanted to stay with Daddy. I said I understood this was hard, but we'd have fun together. He cried most of the drive to my hotel room. I'd upgraded to a suite with a separate bedroom so Aiden would have his own space. I'd bought new sheets and stuffed animals and books to make it feel welcoming. When we got to the room, Aiden looked around and asked where his real room was. I said this was where we'd stay for now until Mommy found an apartment. He asked why we couldn't go back to the real house with Daddy. I said Mommy and Daddy were living separately for a while. He asked if it was because of him, and I said absolutely not. This was about grown-up problems that had nothing to do with him. He didn't look convinced. That first evening was hard. Aiden was withdrawn and quiet. He didn't want to play games or read books. He asked to call Daddy, and I let him. Trevor answered, and Aiden immediately started crying again, saying he wanted to come home. I could hear Trevor's voice through the phone saying he wanted that too, but the court wouldn't let him. Trevor said he'd see Aiden Wednesday, and they'd have a great weekend together. After the call, Aiden went to the bedroom and closed the door. I sat outside feeling helpless. This was exactly what Trevor wanted. He'd successfully made Aiden view me as the enemy who'd taken him away from his real parent. Monday morning, I took Aiden to school and he asked if Daddy would pick him up. I said no, Mommy would pick him up because it was my day. He looked disappointed. At school, Mrs. Kimball saw me at drop-off and asked if everything was okay. I said we were going through a separation and a custody evaluation. She nodded and said she'd document anything concerning that came up with Aiden. That afternoon, when I picked Aiden up, he asked what we were doing tonight. I said we could do anything he wanted. He said he wanted to go to Daddy's house. I said we'd be at the hotel, but we could order pizza and watch a movie. He said okay, but didn't seem excited. We got pizza and put on a movie he'd been wanting to see. Halfway through, he fell asleep on the couch. I carried him to the bed and tucked him in. He looked so small and confused, and I felt rage toward Trevor for putting him through this. Tuesday was better. Aiden woke up in a slightly better mood, and we made pancakes together in the hotel's small kitchenette. He helped pour the batter and flip them, and he smiled when they came out good. We spent the day at the Science Museum, and he seemed to forget to be sad for a while. He asked questions about the exhibits and held my hand walking through the dinosaur section. At dinner that night, he said this was actually fun. I said I was so glad and that we'd have lots more fun days together. He asked if Daddy was mad at me for taking him away. I said Mommy and Daddy were working out grown-up problems and that neither of us was mad at him. He asked if I was mad at Daddy. I said I was sad about some things but working to make them better. I didn't want to lie, but I also didn't want to badmouth Trevor and do exactly what he'd been doing to me. Wednesday morning was the first exchange back to Trevor. I drove Aiden to school and Trevor picked him up that afternoon. That night I sat alone in the hotel room and it felt empty. I called my mother and told her how the past few days had gone. She said it sounded like I was doing everything right. She said give it time and Aiden would come around. Dr. Brennan called me Thursday morning to schedule my first evaluation interview. We set it for Saturday at her office. She explained the process over the phone. She'd interview each parent separately, observe each parent with Aiden in natural settings, interview Aiden alone, and talk to collateral contacts like teachers and family members. The whole evaluation would take 6 weeks, and she'd submit a written report with recommendations. She said custody evaluations were comprehensive and sometimes uncomfortable because she'd be asking difficult questions. She needed me to be completely honest even when the truth wasn't flattering. Saturday morning, I drove to Dr. Brennan's office in a medical building downtown. She was in her 40s with kind eyes and a professional demeanor. Her office had comfortable chairs and shelves full of psychology books. She asked me to tell her about my family. I explained how Trevor and I met, our marriage, Aiden's birth, my nursing career. She asked about my work schedule in detail, and I walked through the 3 12-hour shifts. She asked how I managed childcare on work days, and I explained Trevor handled it. She asked if that had been a source of tension. I said initially no, but in the past year, Trevor had started making it into a bigger issue. She asked me to describe the alienation I'd observed. I told her everything. The backup parent comment, the drawings from school, the recordings, the way Aiden pulled away from me, Trevor's threat to divorce if I didn't quit my job. Dr. Brennan took notes throughout. She asked how I thought the current custody schedule was affecting Aiden. I said honestly he seemed confused and upset about being separated from Trevor. She asked if I thought that was because of alienation or because of the disruption. I said probably both. She asked what I wanted from the custody arrangement long term. I said I wanted equal time with my son, and I wanted the alienation to stop. I wanted Aiden to have a healthy relationship with both parents without being taught to devalue either one. Dr. Brennan asked about Trevor's perspective and what I thought he'd say about me as a parent. I said Trevor would claim I was absent and career-focused and that he'd been doing all the real parenting. She asked if there was truth to that. I said the truth was I worked 3 days a week in a demanding job, but I was home and present the other 4 days. I said Trevor had weaponized my work schedule to make himself look like the only parent who mattered. She asked if I'd considered reducing my work hours. I said yes, but it wasn't financially feasible and shouldn't be necessary. I was working a normal professional schedule. She asked how I'd respond if the evaluation recommended Trevor having primary custody. I felt my throat tighten. I said I'd be devastated and I'd fight it because Aiden deserved an equal relationship with both parents. Dr. Brennan said she wasn't making any recommendations yet, just asking hypotheticals. The interview lasted 2 hours. When I left, I felt drained, but also hopeful that Dr. Brennan was thorough and fair. Trevor's interview happened the following Wednesday. I didn't know what he said, but Patricia called Gregory afterward, and apparently it didn't go well. Patricia told Gregory that Trevor had been defensive and had struggled to provide concrete examples of my inadequate parenting beyond my work schedule. Dr. Brennan had pressed him on the backup parent comment, and he'd tried to explain it away as a misunderstanding. Patricia was concerned that Trevor had come across as controlling rather than concerned. She floated the idea of settlement discussions. Gregory said we'd consider it, but my position was firm. I wanted equal custody, and I wanted the alienation behaviors to stop. If Trevor agreed to those terms, we could avoid trial. If not, we'd see what Dr. Brennan's report said. The custody exchanges continued every Wednesday for the next month. Some weeks Aiden transitioned smoothly. Other weeks he cried and resisted. I noticed patterns. After a weekend with Trevor, Aiden would be distant and withdrawn with me for the first day. By Monday he'd warm up, and Tuesday we'd have good connection. Then Wednesday he'd go back to Trevor and the cycle would restart. Dr. Brennan observed both of us separately with Aiden. She came to my hotel room one Sunday afternoon and watched me and Aiden make dinner together and play board games. She took notes silently in the corner. I tried to act natural, but it was hard knowing everything was being assessed. Aiden seemed comfortable with me during the observation, and that was good. Dr. Brennan observed Trevor at his house on a different day, and I didn't know how that went. She interviewed Aiden alone at her office, and he was in there for 45 minutes. When he came out, he looked tired. Dr. Brennan walked him to where I was waiting and said Aiden did great. She'd be in touch once she finished all her interviews. 2 weeks later, Dr. Brennan's report was filed with the court. Gregory got a copy and called me immediately. He said the report was strongly in my favor. Dr. Brennan had concluded that Trevor was engaging in parental alienation by systematically undermining my role and importance. She documented the pattern of negative comments, the way Aiden had been taught to view me as less present than I actually was, and Trevor's attempts to monopolize parenting time. She'd noted that during her observation, Aiden was happy and engaged with me once given sustained time together. She'd observed that after weekends with Trevor, Aiden showed signs of alienation that diminished during time with me. Her recommendation was for equal shared custody with specific provisions. Both parents were required to attend co-parenting therapy. Trevor was required to attend individual therapy addressing his controlling behaviors. Neither parent could make disparaging comments about the other. All communication about Aiden had to go through a co-parenting app that would be monitored. Dr. Brennan noted that if Trevor continued alienating behaviors, she'd recommend I have primary custody. The report was damning for Trevor. Patricia called Gregory and said Trevor wanted to settle. They proposed a custody agreement following Dr. Brennan's recommendations with minor modifications. The final hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks out to finalize everything. I felt cautiously hopeful. Trevor seemed to realize he'd lost and was trying to accept the inevitable. The week before the hearing, Trevor asked through the attorneys if we could talk directly about Aiden's transition. Gregory advised against it, but I said I'd meet Trevor in a public place with clear boundaries. We met at a coffee shop on Wednesday afternoon. Trevor looked defeated. He said he'd been thinking about everything and he realized he'd handled things wrong. He said he'd been scared of losing Aiden's primary bond and had overcompensated by pushing me out. He said the evaluation process had been eye-opening and he wanted to do better. I asked if he understood that telling Aiden I was a backup parent was damaging. Trevor said yes, he understood that now. He said he'd been following bad advice from online forums about fathers' rights and had gotten caught up in protecting his role without considering the harm to Aiden. I said Aiden deserved both parents equally. Trevor agreed. He asked if we could try to co-parent cooperatively instead of fighting through attorneys. I said I was willing to try, but I needed to trust that the alienation would stop. Trevor said he'd do the therapy and follow all the court orders. He said he just wanted Aiden to be happy. I said me too. We agreed to the settlement terms. The hearing the following week was brief. Judge Wolf reviewed the settlement agreement and Dr. Brennan's report. She asked both of us directly if we understood the terms and agreed to them. We both said yes. She asked Trevor specifically if he understood that alienating behavior would result in custody modification. Trevor said he understood. Judge Wolf signed the order establishing equal shared custody with all the provisions Dr. Brennan had recommended. She said she'd review the case in 6 months to ensure compliance. Court was adjourned. 1 year later, Aiden was 7 and thriving with the shared custody arrangement. He spent Sunday through Wednesday with me and Wednesday night through Saturday with Trevor. We'd both completed the required therapy and were communicating through the co-parenting app without major conflicts. Aiden no longer made comments about me being less important or absent. He talked about both parents positively and seemed comfortable in both homes. I'd moved into a 2-bedroom apartment near Aiden's school and had created a space that felt like home. Trevor had started dating someone new and seemed less focused on controlling me. The alienation behaviors had stopped, either because he'd genuinely changed or because he knew Dr. Brennan's report would be used against him if he started again. Mrs. Kimball told me at a conference that Aiden's drawings now showed both parents equally, and he talked about both of us regularly. The damage from that year of alienation was slowly healing. Aiden was learning that both his parents loved him and were equally important. I was still nursing 3 12-hour shifts per week, and it no longer defined my worth as a mother, because now Aiden understood that working parents could be present parents, and that love wasn't measured in hours, but in quality and consistency, and showing up for what mattered. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.